Hello guys, welcome to your next set of notes. Today we're going to be talking about solving proportions. So we've been talking about proportional and non-proportional relationships. Now we're going to get into the actual solving of a proportion. So first of all, the question is, what is a proportion? So make sure that you have cut and glued your purple page down into your notes. That's the one we're going to start with. And then we will do the yellow page after the purple page. So first things first, we need to define it. A proportion is an equation. It is an equation which states that two ratios are equal. That's where we get that word proportional from. It's one ratio is equal to another ratio, like we have been working with our equivalent ratios. So a unit rate is when one ratio has the second term of 1. We already knew that. That can go along with this and help us out as well. So first things first is being able to identify proportional relationships. So you need to set up ratios as fractions. That's how we're used to working with them. I told you that's the way we will see it most often, is if we set up our ratios as fractions equal to one another. So if you look at down below at the guided practice, I have a fraction equal to a fraction equal to a fraction, a ratio equal to a ratio equal to a ratio. It is two ratios equal to one another, which is an equation that states two ratios are equal. So once they're set up, which most of the time they will be for you, sometimes you might have to set them up on your own, you will then do something that is called cross multiply. Some of you may have heard of this, others of you may not. I will show you in a minute what that means. Once you have cross multiplied, you will see if you are left with a true statement. That the relationship is proportional. So here is what that means. On number 1 here, it is asking, is the relationship proportional? Well, step 1, write the ratios as fractions. Done. Step 2, cross multiply. Here's what I mean by that. I want to take my numbers that are across from one another. So in this case, the numbers cross from one another are 10 and 6. The numbers that are cross from one another are 12 and 5. I take my numbers that are cross, they are opposite diagonally wise, and I multiply them together. So in this case, I have 6 times 10 is 60, and I have 12 times 5 is 60. So is 60 equal to 60? Yes, it is. Therefore, when they ask, is this relationship proportional, your answer is yes. Now, I know some of you are like, I don't need to do that because 10/12 simplifies down to 5/6. I get that. I totally understand it. That is another way to solve this problem. However, that is not what I'm asking you to do. I need you to make sure that you know that you can cross multiply. So this is the way I need you to solve it in your notes. This is the way that I need you to solve it when it comes to your homework assignment. Otherwise, I will mark it wrong and you will have to fix it for me. So let's look at number 2. Hey, this one's asking the exact same thing. 9/10 is equal to 16/20. I want you to do exactly what we just did on number 1 for number 2, and then tell me yes or no. If it is a true statement, meaning 60 is equal to 60, that's a true statement. If it was 60 equal to 80, that is not a true statement, which means it would not be proportional if they do not actually equal one another. So do number 2 for me so I can see if that makes sense to you or not. Make sure you come to class with questions if you have them, please. So number 1 on solving proportions, so now we have to solve. When I say solve, it's like when we look at number 3, you see there's that x there. Find the value of x. That's what I mean by solve. That's what you need to do when I say solve. I mean, what does x equal? What is its value? So when we go to set up solving proportions, once again, you need to set the ratios as fractions equal to one another. So on my 3 and 4, we had fractions already, but if they are not that case, you'll have to do it that way. Then number 2, you will need to multiply, or cross multiply, excuse me. So same thing. Notice so far my first 2 steps are exactly the same. Set them as fractions, cross multiply. Step 3 is to solve for the variable. And that part I will show you what that means right now. So when we look at this, they're already set up as fractions. I don't need to do anything. And I do need to cross multiply. So that means I take 50 and I multiply it by 3. Well, 50 times 3 is 150. That is then going to be equal to my 10 times x, which is just 10x. I do not need to put a multiplication sign right there. That is one of my invisible math rules that's on the back of my classroom wall, that there is a multiplication sign in between that 10 and that x. It does not need to be written. So I have here 150 equals 10x. I need to know, what does x equal? There's 2 different ways to figure this out. In one way, I will be teaching you, and you will have to learn it this year, but not necessarily quite yet. I just need to ask myself the question, 10 times what will give me 150, and that is what my x is. Or, I do the exact opposite. If I see here that I am multiplying by 10, my x and 10 are multiplying, I do the exact opposite, which means the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide by 10 to get those 10s to go away. And then I'm going to divide 150 also by 10, because the rule is whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So if I take 150 divided by 10, I'm going to get that x equals 15. And that is my answer, x equals 15. As I said, you can also just do 10 times what equals 150? Well, 10 times 15 is 150, so my answer is 15. I don't have to do this dividing process. However, this is always going to work. So if you cannot figure out the answer off the top of your head, you take the number that is by itself and you divide it by the number that is next to the variable. That will always work. And we will do that as part of one of our units this year that you guys will be expected to learn. So I want you guys to do number 4 on your own. I'm going to give you a heads up. It is okay to get fractions as answers. It is also to get okay decimals as answers. So I either want you to give me this answer as a fraction in mixed numbered form. Hopefully you remember what mixed numbers mean from 5th grade. Or, if you're more comfortable with it, you can write it as a decimal. Either one would be accepted as long as you make sure you round properly or write it properly. So I need you guys to do 2 and 4. I just want to see what parts you understand, what parts you don't. And in class, when we're working together, we will do a lot of practice together as a group. So now we're going to move on to the yellow page. And we have this whole setting up proportions page for us that they wrote everything out. So you didn't have to write anything down. But when I set up a proportion, that is when you are given a word problem and it's not set up for you. And you have to read the problem and set up the proportion, which is quite tricky. So here are your steps. Your first question, what do you need to find? Read the problem carefully to identify what piece of information is missing. This will be represented by the variable excuse me, in your proportion. Step 2, what do you already know? Read the problem carefully again to identify what piece of information you have. Amounts and units are important. 3, set up the proportion, keeping the units the same on both ratios. 4, solve, cross-multiply and solve for the variable. 5, check, cross-multiply to ensure your answer is correct. Okay, so let's do 2 together, and then I'll have you do 3 and 4 by yourself. But if we look at number 1, It says Kim earned $420 for 30 hours of work last week. If she earns the same hourly rate next week, how much will she earn for 40 hours of work? So step one, what do I need to find? When I read that problem, it usually comes after how much or how many or something like that. And in this case, it says how much will she earn, which means I am looking for money. I want money as my answer. Then it says, what do you know? Well, I know that she earns $420 in 30 hours. So I know this. So we know $420 in 30 hours. I need to write that as a ratio. I need to write that as a rate. What always goes on top? Money. So I should have $420 over 30 hours. I write that as a ratio because that ratio is equal to another ratio that I am trying to find. It then tells me that how much will she earn, I want to know money, for 40 hours. So in this case, I now have money that I don't know and 40 hours. Well, if I don't know my money, money always goes on top. So I'm going to put a variable there, just X is fine, and 40 hours goes on bottom. Notice I have money and money on top, hours and hours on bottom. You have to do it that way. I cannot flip-flop. I can't have money and hours and hours and money. That does not work. You will get the wrong answer every single time. So that is how we set this up. Notice it says that you do not need to solve. So I do not want you worrying about solving. I just want you to worry about setting it up right now. But otherwise, once it is set up, we would then solve this problem to get an answer. And we'll actually do that in class together. But I do not want you to do it on your homework. So number 2, okay, Ben traveled for 1,800 miles over 3 days. If he continues to travel at the same rate, how many miles will he have traveled after 8.5 days or 8.5 days? So once again, what do I need to find? It says how many miles. So I want to know how many miles I need to travel. Now, what do I know? Well, I know that he traveled 1,800 miles over 3 days. I need to write that as a ratio, which means whatever comes first goes on top, whatever comes second goes on bottom, as long as it makes sense. So I have 1,800 miles over 3 days, so I would literally write 1,800 miles over 3 days. That will be equal to another ratio that I need to now find out. So my next part, it says how many miles, that's what I want to know, after 8.5 days. So I don't know my miles, but I know my number of days. And so I would write miles, which is 8, which I do not know, so that is my X, and then my 8.5 days goes on bottom. Notice days and days are on bottom, miles and miles are on top. I have to stay consistent. I cannot flip it around. So like I said, I don't want you to worry about solving, but I do want you to set up 3 and 4. That way we can do practice with solving them in class together as a group. You do not have to do that part for homework. You just need to write out 3 and 4. I do want to point out that I know the X's are in the same spot on these two problems. That does not mean that they are always going to be. Okay, that does not mean that they always are going to be. That does not mean they always have to be. It just happened to be the case in this point. So, giving you a heads up there, they do not always will be in that spot. So, even though it may look like it, that's not always going to be the case. So, we're going to do a lot of practice. Solving proportions is what we're going to do for the next 3 days in class to get a lot of practice with it to make sure we are fully understanding the concept. So, good luck. I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your night. Bye-bye.